I think if you put me on the spot and forced me to choose a favourite fictional character, it would be Conan. Conan the Barbarian, Conan the Cimmerian, invented, of course, by the author Robert E. Howard, who was writing furiously from Texas, mostly for the pulps, in the 20s and 30s. Now, that character has showed no decrease in popularity in the last, well, virtually 100 years. In fact, quite the reverse. We've had a range of Conan comics, from the early Marvel Savage Sword of Conan up to new editions and new versions that are still coming out today. We've had Conan in computer games, role-playing games. We've had a few Conan films, but I'm not going to be talking too much about those today. And of course, we've had a huge amount of Conan pastiches and homages from a range of authors. Today, we're looking at the latest one, Titan Books' Cult of the Obsidian Moon. Hi, I'm Rob Poyton. Thanks for joining me today for this review of Conan, Cult of the Obsidian Moon. As I said, it's a Titan book and it's subtitled A Black Stone Novel. I think this relates to the latest comic run, but I haven't read that yet, so I'm not entirely sure. And the author is James Lovegrove. Now, I've been aware of James's work mostly through his Sherlock Holmes Lovecraftian novels, which are a cracking read. In fact, we enjoyed those so much we invited James on to the Innsmouth Book Club, the podcast which I co-host. I'll put a link up to that in the show notes below. I knew James through those books, but is a very prolific author, has written a ton of stuff. Again, if I put the link up below, plus a link to his website, you'll be able to go there and see some of the other things he's written as well. James, like myself, is very much a Robert E. Howard and Conan fan, and he did mention during the interview that this was his next novel that he was working on, a dream project for any fan, of course. And it's interesting, just reading the bio at the back of the book here, that James and I discovered Conan at about the same age. He writes that he was 11, his grandmother gave him some book tokens, and he went out and bought all the Sphere paperbacks available at the time of Conan. I had a similar experience at about the same age when my dad brought home this, Conan the Adventurer. There we go, that's from 1973, I think, 1974, with that amazing Frazetta cover. My dad brought that home and read it and said, "Hey, you might like this," and he wasn't wrong. Dad really was. From there, of course, became a great Robert E. Howard fan, and from there into Lovecraft and Clark Ashton Smith, Michael Moorcock, Fritz Leiber, and so on and so on. So this really was my gateway, if you like, into the world of sword and sorcery. Now, being such a fan, it does mean when it comes to Conan adaptations in particular, I'm very, very picky. I mentioned the films earlier. I thought the first film, excellent sword and sorcery film, not a very good Conan film, and the other two, well, let's not even go there. When it comes to pastiches, whether that's in comic form or in book, I've read pretty much everything as far as I know. There's some stuff I haven't read, obviously, but I do have quite a large collection of Conan comics, Conan books, Conan stories. And they range from, if we stick to books, from what I'd call top tier pastiche, people like Carl Edward Wagner, Paul Anderson, Andrew J. Offord, all the way down to, well, let's just say less successful versions of Conan. So having chatted to James, having enjoyed his Holmesian Cthulhu works, I was very interested to see what he made of the Conan character, and I'm very pleased to say that, in my opinion at least, I'd put him up at the top tier of Conan pastiches. Is that a word? Conan authors, let's put it like that. Definitely at the higher end of the scale. So, first of all, let's take a look at the book itself. We get a nice hardback book. This came out last year. I have been waiting for the paperback edition, but I don't think that's due out till about June this year, June 26th. Not quite sure why there's such a long break, But, you know, it was Christmas, it went on the list, and my lovely wife bought me the hardback copy. We have a cover that's very similar in design to the previous two Titan novels, Blood of the Serpent and City of the Dead. And I did do a review of Blood of the Serpent last year. I'll just pop the link to that below as well. So, very nicely produced. And inside we have the requisite map, of course, based on Robert E. Howard's original. Very nicely done. A little bit small to read, but you know, I know this map as well as I know the London Underground or maps of my local area, so not really necessary in that sense, but always nice to have. And as you'd expect from Titan, a very nicely produced book, about 285 pages, I believe. If you've read any of James's Sherlock Holmes mythos books, you will know that he uses a very nice framing device of Watson's papers being discovered some years after his death, and the person going through these papers writing correspondence, explaining the setup, and then you're into the story. And I like that James here uses a similar idea. We have a letter from James Allison, dated August 1935. Now, James Allison is another Robert E. Howard character that you may know. One of the main things with this character is he was able to remember past lives. So we get stories like the Garden of Fear, I think there was the Marches of Valhalla and the Valley of the Worm, where James Allison is remembering his previous life as a sort of barbarian warrior and various adventures he went through. I think there was one as well where he went into Dagon's cave. It was very much a Worms of the Earth type story. I certainly read that in Savage Sword of Conan. I think that was one of the original stories as well. So it's a very nice framing device, not the least because we get mention of another Robert E. Howard character, but also because part of the plot here revolves around a character who remembers not only his past lives, but also can see his future lives as well. We're in the period not long after events in the story Queen of the Black Coast. So Conan's great love, the pirate queen Belit, has died, perished at the hands of the winged ape, of course, which, might play a little into this story as well. Conan's basically drinking himself senseless, quite typical for the character, and he meets a pair of Aesir, a married couple, Hunwulf and Gudrun, and also their son Bjorn as well. Now, these are Aesir, and we're way down in the south, far away from both Samaria and the land of the Aesir. They're basically outcasts from their tribe. They had to flee when Hunwulf murdered the man who was betrothed to Gudrun, his childhood sweetheart. So, they're fugitives. They are being tracked as well by relatives of the man they murdered, because the Aesir and the Vanir, as we know, there's nothing they like more than a good blood feud. And Hunwulf is the character I mentioned who gets these visions of his past lives and also visions of the future as well. Not only that, his son Bjorn exhibits a mystical power where he seems to be able to communicate very well with animals. At one point during the story, he calms down a feral dog that is going to attack him. This also is where we get just one of many Easter eggs. This is quite a big one. It's difficult to miss if you're a Howard fan, because essentially what Hunwulf does, what he explains, what he tells Conan as part of his backstory, is that James Allison story I mentioned, Garden of Fear, which involves a winged humanoid taking someone and that person's partner going to rescue them from the tower out in the Garden of Fear. So we start getting this nice connection. One, we've got a winged humanoid, which plays back to Belit's death, so that triggers something in Conan's mind. But then it ties in with this James Allison story as well. I thought that was nice. Howard quite often did this with his characters. We had King Cole appearing in the Bran McMorn story, for example. And, of course, outside of that, Howard, Lovecraft and Smith all borrowed liberally from each other's mythos. They all contributed to this sprawling entity that's become known as the Cthulhu mythos. And I do think a good element of sword and sorcery, particularly when it's Conan, is to have that Lovecraftian element in it. that touch of cosmic horror. Now, one of these winged humanoids very soon turns up because, as I mentioned, the Aesir couple are being tracked. There's relatives out for revenge. They catch up. They capture Bjorn. Bjorn is then taken from them by one of these winged humanoids. Oh, and I thought the other thing this being reminded me of was the Yagas from the Almeric novel, one of the few novels that Howard wrote, actually. So the main part of the plot is Conan and Hunwulf and Gudrun go in to rescue Bjorn. To do this, they have to go through the Rotlands. I really liked these scenes with the Rotlands. That was something very different and very vivid. If you can imagine a sort of mutated jungle, I suppose, where plants they are plants, but they do move quite a lot. They seem to have a lot of tentacle and teeth things going on as well. In fact, it put me in mind of some of the Clark Ashton Smith stories. So again, we get that nice crossover between, the three giants of weird fiction. Another nice thing here was we start to get other characters come into the story as well, particularly children. We get a young lad looking for his sister who was taken. He joins them. And the nice thing with this character, we're in sort of the area around Kush now. So Howard's sort of proto-Africa, I guess you could call it. And this young lad who's guiding the other three weaves in this very nice tale from his own tribe's folklore and legend about a lion that fits really nicely into the story. I thought that gave it an extra element, an extra little bit of depth to just, we've got to go through there and we've got to kill the monsters, we've got to kill the bad guys. And having that folklore tale in kind of explains what's going on. You know, is the lion really a lion or does it represent something else? So I thought that was a really nice touch as well. So anyway, as you might expect, Conan and his companions get through the Rotlands. They find the ruined city of the winged humanoids. We get to learn their origin. We get to learn what's going on, what is going to happen to these kids. And this all relates to the cult of the Obsidian Moon, the title of the book, which is being operated as usual in Robert E. Howard stories. There's like an evil archpriest, evil wizard type. I don't think Howard liked priests or wizards very much. In fact, that brings up one point, because of course I've looked at some other reviews of this, and one thing that came up was the language used. A comment was that some of the characters used language that sounded a little too sophisticated or didn't sound right for Aesir or Sumerian warriors or whatever. Okay, that's an opinion, but the example they chose was Conan saying, "Oh, a murrain on you for doing this." Whoever wrote that review doesn't know their Conan very well, because I think it's in the Scarlet Citadel. Conan actually says, in Robert E. Howard's own words, "A murrain on you wizards and your feuds." So I thought that was great. That was a nice throwback to Howardian language. And the prose throughout I thought was very good, particularly the opening, a very vivid Howardian opening that really pulled me in. And in fact, I read about half of the book in one sitting. So it brought me in, it grabbed me, and it kept my attention throughout. This was one of my criticisms of Blood of the Serpent, which was a prequel to Red Now's. It was a good story, but I felt in places it was padded a little bit and it dragged. We had quite a lot of scenes of, it seemed to be Conan runs, Conan takes a pee, Conan kills a crocodile, a lion, a bear, whatever, you know. This kept moving very nicely. The plot rolled along really well and it kept me engaged all the way through. And I do think part of the issue here, now this isn't something we spoke about with James, but I have spoken to other authors about this, is if you want to put a book out now through a mainstream publisher, you have to write X number of words. The book has to be X number of pages long. And I do feel sometimes, again, I'm not blaming the author because this is pressure from the publisher. I do feel sometimes we get padding. I'm just reading a book at the moment. It's a very good vampire story, but it could probably be cut down by maybe a quarter, There's quite a lot of chapters describing the town and what goes on. And when he was a kid, little Johnny used to do this and that. And it doesn't move the story along at all. It just feels like padding because, say my feeling is, the author has to produce 400 pages or whatever it is. And as I say quite a lot on the Innsmouth Book Club, it actually puts me off now. I don't know if publishers think, oh, people are only going to buy a book if it's this big. You know, they're spending their hard-earned money, they want something. I much prefer shorter novels and even novellas, to be honest. And if we think back to Robert E. Howard, he only wrote one Conan novel, Hour of the Dragon, Conan the Conqueror, which I think was about 70,000 words. Now, in today's market, 70,000 words is the first half of the first book, you know, let alone the rest of your trilogy or quadrilogy or whatever it is. Some other people also say that Sword and Sorcery is best suited to the short story format. I don't necessarily agree with that myself. I do like short stories, but my own Sword and Sorcery series, The Wolf Who Would Be King, I tend to make those about 70, 80,000, although I've written some short stories in that as well. But I do think if you're presented with a character like Conan, where the action tends to be quite episodic and things can be resolved quite quickly, you know, you read a story like Rogues in the House or something, after about 4 pages, Conan is kicking someone and all the rest of it. So where you've got that fast-paced action, that can be difficult to extend out over pages and pages. But I think James does do a very good job in this case. As I say, it does keep moving. Perhaps having those extra characters in helps. And certainly that scene in the Rotlands. In fact, I would have liked to have spent a little more time there even. That was very nicely described, and it really develops a good atmosphere there. So there we go. That's Conan, Cult of the Obsidian Moon. As I said, on my pastiche chart, where obviously we've got Robert E. Howard at the top, where no one's going to touch that. And we've got our Carl Edward Wagners and all the rest. I'd certainly put this up at the top of the chart there. Very enjoyable, a cracking read. I do think this series is continuing. I think they're using a different author each time. So it's interesting as well to see each author's take on the character. I think the secret, if you like, to Conan is the Howardian language, the vibrancy, and there's a particular type of action as well. Obviously, the character has traits. Having said that, the character does develop through his career, from the young barbarian in Frost Giant's Daughter through to Conan the King. But that then gives an author a little bit of leeway to play with as well. It's not such a one-dimensional character as people might think. So yes, I'd recommend this one. If you've read it, do let me know what you think. In fact, if you want to let me know about Conan things in general, then do pop a comment below. If you've read that other novel, the City of the Dead, because I haven't read that one yet, let me know what you think of that. And I must catch up with Conan comics. As I say, I've got boxes and boxes of Savage Sword and Conans, but the new ones I've not really taken much of a look at yet. Is the artwork as good? Are the stories are good? For me, in my mind, I mean, I grew up on Barry Windsor Smith and John Buscema and Roy Thomas. That's quite a tough combo to beat. But yeah, I should take a look and make my own mind up. Okay, that's it for today. Thanks again for joining me. If you haven't already, please do like, share and subscribe. Your subscriptions are much appreciated and they do really help the channel. Keep your sword sharp and I'll see you soon.